Welcome to Wineskins, a Vineyard Canada podcast. I'm David Ruis, the National Director of Vineyard Canada.
And I'm Joyce Rees, our National Resource Coordinator. We're both a part of the Foundations team, serving as Vineyard Canada staff to support local churches and their leaders to flourish. Well, David, here we are, going to take a crack at a first episode in our newly launched Wineskins podcast.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you excited?
I'm stoked. I'm very stoked. Yeah.
Why don't you just share a little bit with whoever's listening today, just where we came up with the idea of titling the podcast itself, Wineskins.
Yeah, I think as we were reflecting on the trajectory, the arc of what we were talking about, it was almost like an aha thing that dropped in the space. I can't remember how many of us were knocking this around, probably 3 or 4 of us or something.
But it was you that came up with this.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to give kudos, but but I think what happened is I realized, obviously tapping into the parable of Jesus, which parables are a little dicey because you can make them mean all sorts of things. I guess the entire biblical text, you can do that too. But parables in particular are, a picture or an evocative story or something and I realized sometimes we focus a lot on whether we're getting new wine or what is old or new or this and that and thus and so. And all of a sudden it hit me. No, it's actually how you hold it as well.
Yeah.
Not contain it in the sense of control it, but provide something as what you would do for wine that actually doesn't have everything spilling on the ground.
Right. A method for delivery.
A method for delivery, but also a method for retention.
Yeah, good
it's
point.
not just spilling away. So what jumps out at me in that parable is the thing of that both are preserved. Now, some are saying both the wine and the wineskin, but there are several scholars that look at it and how it impacts me just in a first impression way, even, is that both the old and the new are preserved. So you're not throwing one away for the other.
Right.
It's about timing. It's about containing. It's about, as you said, a delivery mechanism, but it's also a holding. Yeah. Like as we're learning in these times, we're rediscovering in some very fresh ways old wine, some of the ancient traditions, some of the monastic rhythms of life. A lot of us across, the Vineyard movement are tapping Ignatian practices in a way that seems really congruent with our Vineyard values and such. And so there's a proper way to deliver that and hold that, preserve that. But you can't jam the new stuff into that necessarily, or everything gets lost. Right. So as we were thinking about this podcast, thinking about leadership and the church and, all those implications, it was like, oh my goodness, that's what we're after, is wine skins, not just a way or a method, but to a discerning process to go, how do we hold what the Spirit is pouring out right now for its proper delivery and its proper preserving. There are things that are meant to go further and might just be one great glass of old vintage wine way down the line somewhere. It's not the whole party or the whole meal, and it's holding it all together. Anyway, I
love it. And I really, I was impacted. I was in that conversation and it felt like, oh yeah, that's where we want to go. Yeah. That's what we want to call it, and not new wineskins. So we're unpacking, a whole host of things that the Lord's given, particularly to our stream of the church in the Vineyard, over the history of our fairly young movement and more. So not just particularly new things. So I think the other thing we want to talk about is, just straight out of the gate on this first episode is not just that we're launching the podcast, but why. And I know, because you and I have had conversations about this in tandem with the Foundations team, which is like our staffing leadership team for Vineyard Canada, we'd really wrestled through how do we get at creating health in the life of the church. The goal is really healthy churches, but they need to be led by healthy people. Yeah. So we recognize, backing up, okay, how do we reach for that without it being like, hey, we're going to tell you how to fill in the blank, whatever, do whatever you're doing at your local. But we also don't want to be like the people that are just defaulted to when everything goes horribly wrong. Like that, I think Todd and I said it in the promo for this podcast. We don't want to just be doing intervention. We want to get at prevention.
Yes. Get ahead
so that we can get healthy.
Exactly.
So,
preventative medicine, and not just tackling symptoms or presenting problems, which is what you're saying, but actually able to get down to the roots of things and get help.
Yeah, absolutely. So backing up, we want to recognize that being rooted in the way of Jesus is absolutely essential for health, both personally and communally. And I think sometimes to the detriment of the church these days, people are so focused on their own personal spiritual formation, their own personal walk with God, that we neglect the communal shaping as well. And
I agree.
Going to church, to receive or to be encouraged or to be strengthened. And I think leaders sometimes do that as well. So we want to do the both, and it will definitely apply personally, but it ought to. All the things we discuss in these episodes in this first series ought to apply communally specifically. So
no, I agree.
So I think you said this the other day we're batting around some stuff. You talked about that the way of Jesus is what we call the church. It's this overarching call to the people of God to walk in the way of Jesus. Which is where you wanted to start, because that way is fleshed out through God's people. Right. So where do you want to go in terms of beginning? Why this first episode on the church? There's lots of places we could have started.
Yeah, totally. I think, it seems like there's such a famine of understanding of what the church really is. That's kind of the key question everywhere, right? Yeah. Like coming out of a pandemic season, looking at all the upheaval in the international climate, economy, everything. It's sort of like, where does the church fit into all of this mess and all of this knowledge, all of the stuff we're accruing and gleaning and learning and readjusting? Like, does the church have a place in this at all? And I think if the church is just a bunch of meetings to get people together, that doesn't feel very compelling, for one thing. And it feels more like sort of an escape to cope with everything that's going on versus actually a presence right in the midst of things. And when I think about Jesus and calling forward a way of life, it has to happen in community. And so Jesus masterfully, I think, calls forward a body, a new way of expressing how to live together, why to live together, when to live together, all this sort of things. And it's actually the only way we can navigate the eternal path that we're on already. We're not just getting there, we're on our way.
Right. It's now.
The now needs to be expressed through actual real struggle, real community sorting things out. And so my understanding, there's this Greek word ekklesia gets tossed around everywhere, but my understanding of the essence of it is to be called out. Well, what are we called out to be? Yeah. So we're not called out to be a bunch of religious people. We're not called out to be judges, We're not called out to be haters. We're called out to be a new social order that can't exist anywhere but through the empowering of the Holy Spirit, firmly set our compass on the way of Jesus, and we discover how to live it out.
Well, and I think John Wright unpacks this a little bit in his excellent book, Telling God's Story. He talks about the church as a contrast society. So if the ecclesia is called out, right? We're called, like, I grew up in a fairly religious kind of context where you heard people bat around in the King James Version.
Yeah.
That, the idea that we're called out, be ye separate, right? And be called out,
yes.
right? Called out from the world. And so we've had this hyper fixation on what we're not instead of what we are. The ecclesia are called out to be something.
Yes.
Not into this hyper separation, Christian ghettoization.
Exactly.
And I think we want to unpack that a bit today. Mm-hmm. So we'd often default to this Acts 2 text as the birth of the church, but you said something super interesting in a recent conversation that you would root it more in the Matthew text. So why don't you unpack that just for a minute?
Yeah. I mean, of course, we can't throw away Acts. It's incredibly significant, but to me, that was the. Well, okay, here's our thing. That was the wine being poured into the wineskin. I think Jesus gave us an understanding of the container of what was going to be released in the book of Acts. And he turns to Peter and he says, on your confession, a lot of scholars say, I'll build my church. But I think there's something just as poignant about where it took place. He's in Caesarea Philippi.
Okay.
So if I've got my study right here, and I've got my chops together, it is a long walk from the heart of Jerusalem. He is not even anywhere near where you think it would be the wisest place to establish a new religious order, a new way, a new wineskin, if you will. So he's but he's also not just totally away from the center of religious power. He's way at this Roman outpost. So he's nowhere near political or military power either. On top of it all, history tells us where they're standing is this crazy little place where there's a cave that's very close by. My understanding is historically it was actually known by Romans and Greeks. They actually called it the Gate of Hell. Right. Because they believed it's where the little, the little Pan god, Pan came, where he came up from, from the dark regions and, would create all this havoc on the earth and such. My understanding is both for the Greeks and the Romans, this also was scorched earth. It was pagan. It's the type of religion they would qualify as pagan and not civilized. So if the Romans are calling this pagan territory, what are the Jewish people thinking about where? And Jesus has the audacity to say, it's in this moment, I'm beginning to establish my church. I'm calling you out, but in a weird way, I think, as we said earlier, he's calling us in. He's calling us out by going deeper into the human story, to the darkness, to the actual places where it looks like there is no hope left. Makes me think of the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount and the way of Jesus and all these things. And so that little huddled group that had the Holy Spirit descend on and fill up in the book of Acts. Yeah. They were being empowered to continue this work, to move to the very gates of hell itself and not be prevailed over and establish a new way, a new order. Right.
Yeah, and it's in the context of the world. I love that you drew that correlation. I wasn't aware, thinking about Caesarea Philippi and this scorched earth and like the gates of hell, this cave.
Hopefully that's not my storytelling hyperbolic tendencies, but I think there's something really there.
And I like the image that it causes us to have to reconcile. Jesus isn't just saying platitudes, he's putting it in a cultural context.
Yeah,
in a political context, and saying you are going to be something else in contrast. It's that contrast society, and this isn't going to prevail. So we live in a world right now, David, where I think a lot of people would feel like, well, it is prevailing, like the politic of the day or the forces of religion, the polarization's increasing, the deconstruction is wreaking mayhem on the church. And then that's nothing to say about all the crisis or the fallout. Like you and I, in the Vineyard Canada context, we know of tons of contexts where we're hearing all the time churches that blew up, pastors that collided.
Right.
You don't have to think very long and hard, even in the Vineyard, to realize, some pretty significant moving pieces that look like prevailing. Something's prevailing against us. Things are not going as we hoped.
Yeah.
So what do we do with that? What do we do with Jesus is saying they're not going to prevail?
Right.
When it looks like everything might be prevailing.
Right. Well, I think even given our lean for this podcast, the wineskin sort of theme, if something is crumbling and the slats are being kicked out of it, it wasn't the church.
Right.
It wasn't the real thing. And so in a sort of a strange way, it's a gift to us. And the sort of these aha moments of metanoia and repentance where we go, whoa, we were putting our hand, our thoughts, our resource here. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you, Father, for helping us discern and see. And so the good news is, I think, again, leaning into the way of Jesus and the understanding of how his kingdom expands. If we got a few mustard seeds out there, and there's enough yeast, this thing is going to not prevail. And I think something helpful, I mean, is an eschatological arc, not an over-realized eschatology. That's got us all in all kinds of
triumphalism,
but not a just grin and bear it till it all comes through, which I was raised in. It's still really, and for us in our Vineyard context, we call it just wrestling, not just with the tension of the now and the not yet. I'm kind of thinking this through a different lens a little bit now. It's to really celebrate the now. We've only defined sometimes the kingdom now. The kingdom breaking through is when we see certain things happening. Right. Instead of going where, as Jesus said, what's the Father doing? What's the way of Jesus in this moment? And where is the Holy Spirit at work? So where he is at work, maybe in the church right now, is deepening us in our character, deepening us in our resolve for perseverance and to sustain, deepening us in our understanding of what salvation is and isn't. Obviously, we're having this conversation, deepening us in our understanding of who we're called to be on this planet right now in this moment. And that's the kingdom advancing. Right. That's actually the now.
Part of what you could be saying is that if it's a type of refining or a shaking, an awakening, what looks disruptive could actually be grace upon us to cause us to grow, to become healthier. This is the thing of Jesus saying, you lose your life, you find it. The lack isn't an absence of the now. It might be a highlighting of the now.
And also the writer of Hebrews saying, when all things are being shaken, it's so that the unshakable is revealed. And remains. And then she defines it. It could be, we'll just throw that in there. It actually could have been a woman that wrote that book. So it's like, she might be saying, wow, this is, and describing that's the kingdom, the unshakable, which the church is built on.
So it points right back to the Matthew text. So let's think for a second about what you mentioned there, the loaf or the yeast. I can't remember how you phrased it a second ago, but it made me think about the church needing to be centered in Jesus. Obviously, we had our national celebration just in July here of 2022, and we had this theme of just Jesus and trying to remind ourselves, like, if the church is anything, she's rooted in Jesus, or she's centered in Jesus. And Jesus gave this very strong warning in Mark chapter 8 against the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. And I sometimes I laugh when I get to this text, because he's obviously just multiplied bread, He's done all this crazy stuff with like actual loaves and abundance and provision. And then they go on this like ministry trip, this jaunt, and they get to their destination, and there's this like little kerfuffle between the disciples in terms of who was supposed to go buy the bread. And Philip feels like he's on the back foot, like everyone's upset with him. Maybe he should have like packed up some of the abundance, or maybe he should have gone and bought or whatever. And
Yeah.
And then Jesus drops this warning, and it's actually tethered to "Get behind me, Satan." We don't often think about this. This is tethered right to Peter's rebuke, who is the guy that, you know, if you think about who he said he would build the church on.
Yeah, exactly.
Referencing your gates of hell thing that you were just bringing up, wouldn't prevail. And now he's calling him out. And in that context, Jesus warns them against bad yeast. And I think it's very, very important that we highlight the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod and what we think that means for the church today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, we can tether it directly, in my opinion, to the Caesarea Philippi text story. So Jesus is establishing this alternative society, new social order, new expression of diverse, you know, all the stuff that we're thinking about. It's actually justice being able to be fleshed out under the banner of the love and way of Jesus. So he's away from the center of political power, military power. He's away from the center of religious power. Yeah. So in this story, as you've really unpacked super well, he turns in the midst. He says, "I am the loaf. I'm the source." Yeah. He's going, I'm just going to really try to get this through your heads and hearts. It's me. So when you're panicking, when you are trying to get things like you gave this whole context of what's happening in the world today. How do we find our true north? How do we sustain? Is hell prevailing against us? Jesus is like, when all that pressure is on, lean into me as the one loaf. I think it actually, one of the translations says, "I am the loaf. I am the one loaf." Then he says, my assumption or how it impacts me is when you stray from there, you'll reach for other things. And it most likely will look like the yeast of the Pharisee. You'll get super religious. And the most non-religious people that say they're the most non-religious to me sometimes impact me as the most religious.
Sure. I think the Pharisees get a bad rap. I think if we look back through like the lens of the now, and we look back through the church history and the beginnings, you go look at the Pharisees and you think, oh, those guys were all about the rules and the this and the that. But like I see people all the time who like, if we just pray like this, if we just have more of that, if we just, then we can usher in the kingdom. They were just devout, earnest do-gooders who thought if they ticked all the boxes, God would act. And I think there's an awful lot of that in the church today. If we only X, Y, or Z, got the right worship, got the right teaching, had the effective person doing ministry time, I don't know, you fill in the blank.
Yeah, but even take it a step further, if we only got rid of all that. To me, what religion does is it pressures you to conform,
to fix.
Yeah. And so you can be in a non-religious context and feel the incredible pressure to take that drink, because if you don't, you're going to be perceived as religious. And you don't care if everyone else is having a beer. You just might be a teetotaler. And you got alcoholism in your family, but you can so quickly get branded as religious. And so I think it's again, the heart posture, lean into Jesus. He's the source. And then of course the yeast of Herod, politicking, maneuvering, leveraging, all that stuff.
Even the grasp for power in and of itself. The
grasp for power, exactly.
Boy, if there's ever a time in human history where I see that highlighted, you just have to look at the last few years, and none of us would have seen this fight for power, both political, in the social sort of context of the world, but also in the church. And I hear this echo of Jesus's call against performance, power seeking, politicking, buttoning it all up, trying to control. He calls us back to him. So he is the loaf. So if we look at it and you think about the Eucharist, we don't have time to unpack all of that today, but it's pretty central to who we are as the church, new covenant people. This is my body broken for you. I am the loaf. I am enough. I will sustain. I am the way. I am the life, right? Like This is the essence 100%. Of what Jesus calls us to. It makes me think of the echo in John 15, I am the vine. I've been thinking a lot about who the source is. We've been talking about who do we go to in the church for, I don't know, whatever all the things are that we want to see happen. Jesus says he's the source. Or I think last spring at the prayer summit, Liana Clausen was one of the artists featured during the prayer summit who had painted. Do you remember that? What she called the mother tree image. It was that
I was just going to say all the trees
grove, and there's one tree, and then all the trees grow up from that one tree, from that root system.
The root system,
and that's a very Canadian image, but it's another way of saying I am the vine, I am the source, and everything that you are grows out of the life that is only to be found in me. So the church stays vibrant when we worship Jesus, when we're rooted in Jesus, when we feast on Jesus, when we lean into Jesus, just Jesus, and we serve Jesus. I think that's very, very important. I was just recently in a conversation with some of our younger leaders across the movement about the church. It was super fascinating because we were talking about, what the church is for. You could say in the Vineyard, we talk about being a church planting movement, and maybe some people aren't aware that that's part of our history. The way of Jesus is the church, but we actually really believe in the church as Jesus defines that's the way his kingdom's going to come on earth as it is in heaven. So do you want to unpack that a little bit for us? Just your thoughts on what it means for the way of Jesus to be the church? Yeah.
Well, again, it's the call into community. Into that space. And so, it takes different ebbs and forms, different wineskins, if you will, over time. But the old wine and the new wine, I think that we're just trying to keep cultivating in the sense of it's not church planting to expand Vineyard statistics. It's church planting because we realize this is the only way to sustain the kingdom. It's funny to me, sometimes people go, forget the church. I'm just going to do the kingdom stuff. And so you go and they're sincere, they're not like throwing everything away, that they really drill into the kingdom. Next thing you know, people start showing up. Some people start following Jesus. Few people get healed. All of a sudden you got a community and you go, I didn't want to do this. But the point is, if you do the kingdom, you're always going to end up with the ecclesia. You're always going to end up with the church. With the church. But the trick is you can do all the church stuff and never get to the kingdom. If the church is the meeting, the structure, the titles, the roles, the programs. So
we could call that small c versus big C church.
Yeah, I think so. And so our understanding has been, even as we move missionally in our own culture as well as around the world, we're about establishing the community of faith that shines like a light on a hill. And that is, then people are drawn into a faith that's
community.
Fleshed out. Yeah. They're not just checking off a card or saying yes to a prayer, or they're actually having and now have to live it out together.
So I think that's a really important thing to underscore, that the goal of the church isn't converts. That's not the end game. The goal is this flourishing community that would signpost the kingdom of God, that would help people encounter the living God, be transformed. And it's always going to be this motley crew, or that contrast society, to borrow
daily people were added. There was an enfolding, an addition. It was like something growing. It's organic.
And it gives a different imagination for how to live. So you see that unpacked all through the book of Acts. The Holy Spirit inspired them. They modeled their life on the teachings of Jesus, not the way of the world. So that's that contrast thing. Different values and practices that were rooted in their faith in Jesus. So then the church becomes this revelation of Jesus, right? Just Jesus.
Exactly.
His
body.
Yeah, exactly. I think you see these markers in the book of Acts of what the church was about. And, it was teaching, fellowship, or the breaking of bread. You can call that table fellowship, but you could also call that Eucharist. It's a both and, I think. Or communion. There's prayer. They obviously had maybe what we would use colloquial language ministry time, but they were doing the stuff, seeing people get healed, set free, delivered, participating in the gifts and the power of the Holy Spirit. We're going to unpack the Holy Spirit in the next episode a bunch more. They had this life on life discipling that was happening. They were worshiping, and in that, people were being added. So it wasn't for them exclusively. It was this light, attractional, something was happening, overlap with people, not sort of hidden, but announcing Jesus as a new way in the world. And
maybe another thought just strikes me, Joyce, is thinking about some of the stuff we said earlier. When everything around them felt like hell was prevailing, this is where they discovered it wasn't, in living life together and coming around Jesus. So, the highest percentage of the earliest followers of Jesus were slaves, were the poor, were all of this. So it's again, when we only think of the ecclesia, the community, just through the lens of a homogenous, sort of privileged kind of pocket of people, we don't actually end up building the church.
So I agree. Here's a fascinating thing. My local church was disrupted during the pandemic, and like everybody, I think, online. But then if you're a mobile church, lots of people lost their gathering spaces because they were meeting community centers or schools and theaters maybe. And so I think that the church felt like unrooted, like we had no place to gather. And then when you could reopen, it was a tricky thing, I think, for lots of churches globally to find a place. But anyways, I was working on thinking through what the church is and looking through some of the history, and I discovered that the church was actually homeless, like had no physical building of their own for the first over 250 years of their existence globally. Wow. So you think about that, like you see things like Paul, I think in Acts 19, is meeting in a lecture hall because they were in the local synagogue and that wasn't going well. This stuff we'll unpack in the next episode. So then they go into this lecture hall for 2 years. So they borrowed places. They met in borrowed places. So sometimes the Philippian church, we know, met on a beach for a while. They met in houses. They met in Solomon's colonnade, the porch on the outside of the temple. So they had places where they congregated, but they didn't have church buildings. And I think this is important that we really point out that the church is not a building and the church is not an event on Sunday morning. So like for me, I never say to my kids, we're going to church. I actually don't use that language. I say we're going to the worship gathering, or going to be with the people of God, because the people of God are the church. And like you and I might be like, oh, this is a no-brainer. And maybe some people listening go like, why are we even mentioning? Obviously, the church isn't a building and the church isn't an event. But I don't know that that's known information these days. Because I'm talking to younger leaders and they think, wait, what? It's not? It's like, no, the church is the people. And if that people doesn't look other, slaves, New Testament, mottliness, Book of Acts, the diversity that came, the radical upending of the social norms. So, one of the things I'm asking myself, my church community, if we look too much like each other, and if we would have natural affinity in the way of the world, we don't look enough like the people of God that Jesus imagines.
Yeah, I agree. That's great.
Yeah, part of how we got to make him known. Okay, so come back to Paul, because you were talking about this the other day. Paul's in chains, and we get to the end of the book of Acts. I want you to talk about, just from your perspective, what it means to be a church thriving. Obviously, in one episode, we can't unpack the whole of what the church is.
No.
But what note do you want to leave us on in terms of what it means not just to be the church, but to be the church in motion, Book of Acts, embodied, even if it looks like things aren't going particularly well.
Right.
What's our takeaway?
I mean, Paul, like you say, at the end of the Book of Acts, under house arrest, chains for all intents and purposes. It looks like, the big shutdown. Looks like the ultimate COVID restriction. Right? It's like totally. But I think, and again, we don't want to open a whole other vein of thought because we're wrapping here. But, we've often been talking the last years in regards to understanding why the church is here, who she is. I think we were so concerned about being culturally relevant that we lost our sense of being an actual prophetic presence.
Right.
And what I see happening with Paul is people, it says he's in house arrest, but people are coming from all over the place to come see him. And he's just in simplicity, says he just talked about Jesus and he taught about the kingdom and the words and works of Christ. And it is just so simple. And yet this is how the Holy Spirit chooses to end the Book of Acts. And one of the descriptors of what's going on in Paul's ministry at that time, it describes it with two words, bold and unhindered. It says boldly and without hindrance, he was proclaiming the gospel. And he's in chains. So again, it's this crazy upside down, completely different understanding. There is yeast that is permeating a loaf, even though he couldn't physically move anywhere. People that could were moving towards him, and he just kept faithfully talking about Jesus and teaching about the kingdom. And
it's really helpful.
Is how Acts ends in chains with the kingdom advancing boldly and without hindrance.
Beautiful upending. I think it's really, really profound that you highlight that text to us. And I think for all those that engage this series, we may want to chew on that a little bit. What are the hindrances we're experiencing that could actually be unto the flourishing?
Yes.
Be unhindered, boldly making Jesus known in the world instead of seeing it as barrier or a lack or a failing. What could it look like for the church to flourish in spite of these things, to be unhindered, to be bold?
Brilliant.
All right.
Very good.
More to come.
Awesome. More to come. Lots more.
Stay tuned, people. I hope you join the conversation.
Want to keep a pulse on Vineyard Canada throughout the week? Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for reflections, resources, updates, and to gain a deeper understanding of Vineyard theology and values. Our handle is @Vineyard Canada.